A few kilometers offshore from mainland Nova Scotia, near Roseway and some incredible beaches, you'll find McNutt's Island. At one time, this was seen as a place of incredible navigational and military importance. Today, it's a sleepy place, a smattering of cottages, an old wharf, the ruins of a fortress, and a still important lighthouse. McNutt's Island, it's where I'm on my walkabout today. The inshore or northern part of McNutt's Island, where I'm starting my hike today, is about 3.5 kilometers offshore from Sandy Point Lighthouse and 12 kilometers from downtown Shelburne. It pretty much guards the entrance of Shelburne Harbour, with channels named East and West Way on either side of the island. This was originally called Jerusalem Island, and cats were strictly prohibited here. And that's because cats are not named in the Bible. Now, this is the last time on this hike that I'll be looking back towards the Sandy Point shoreline and Shelburne Harbour. From here, I'm going to be headed along the western channel, looking over towards Roseway and Carlton Village, then heading across the forested center of the island onto the fortress and the lighthouse, which look out over the open ocean. I'll be following a couple of old roads today, headed along portions of the McNutt's Island Road and then headed on to the Cape Roseway Lighthouse Road. The Cape Roseway Lighthouse is my destination, a journey of about 6 kilometers. The roads here are still in use, though not remotely busy, and there is no car ferries, so ATVs are far more common in terms of motorized vehicles. This is the main wharf on the island and how most people get here. Of course, people arrive by boat, often from ports around the Shelburne Harbour. And they come here for all sorts of reasons, whether it's hiking or visiting one of the many cottages that are found, for the most part, along the western shore. At one time, they used to use this wharf for servicing the lighthouse, but that's done in another way now. You can also reach this island by taking a kayak to a point close to where I started this hike. That's about a 1 kilometer paddle from Carlton Village Beach. This island is named for Alexander McNutt, who was a British Army officer who lived here for a time. McNutt was born in Derry, Ireland, and moved around through what is now the United States, taking up various posts in different militias. By the mid-1760s, he was a captain at Fort Cumberland on the border of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, responsible for overseeing the arrival of the Ulster Scottish immigrants, as well as immigrants from Londonderry and Ireland to Nova Scotia. Over the course of 4 or 5 years, he was involved in settlements in Lunenburg County, Truro, Moncton, and along the Petitcodiac. It was during this assignment that he lived with his brother on McNutt Island, then still called Jerusalem Island. There is an interesting footnote in history about what Nova Scotia could have become demographically. McNutt had very ambitious plans. In 1762, he proposed to the Privy Council that he be allowed to bring between 7,000 and 8,000 Irish immigrants to Nova Scotia and provide them with land grants. This was considered at the time, but ultimately it was decided that such a large migration from Ireland could have dangerous consequences. They were particularly concerned with the mass emigration from Protestant districts in Ireland, so McNutt's plan was denied. Had it happened, the percentage of the population of Nova Scotia originating from Ireland would have been vastly higher than it is today. By 1771, McNutt would appear in the census for Cobequid, having left this island. There, he served a short stint of less than 2 years in the General Assembly of Nova Scotia for the Londonderry Township over in Cumberland County. He ultimately found himself in debt and had to sell his stake in this island. He came and went from Nova Scotia over a period of time, but left for good in 1794, having reached the rank of colonel. He died in Virginia in 1811. No one lives year-round on the island anymore, but from time to time people have. From 2008 until 2012, one family lived in the house behind me. They've actually written a blog about it, which you can check out online. They renamed this New Jerusalem Farm as a nod to the original name of the island. Now, this property sits pretty much at the intersection of the McNutt's Island Road and the Cape Roseway Lighthouse Road. This home was registered as a heritage property in 2009 and is the oldest residence on the island. The property itself stands out because of the cleared land and stone walls around it, which once helped pen sheep in. The home was originally built by the Perry family in 1857 in the Nova Scotia vernacular style. Thus, it is sometimes called the Old Perry Place. A small apple orchard is found near the shore, which was planted by William Perry in the 1860s. An addition was added to the home in the 1920s, which provided the first indoor washroom on the island and a guest room. There's a tradition of people who live in this home writing about their experiences. Elizabeth Hyde of New York purchased the home in the 1980s, naming it Sunset Farm. She lived in it full-time during the winter of 1985, writing of her time in a book called McNutt's Island Journal. She also continued the tradition of keeping sheep on the island. Hyde passed away in 1993 at the young age of 59, but her family continued to care for the property, keeping it in their family for a half-century. Thus, the location has yet another name to some, Hyde Place. The one oak tree on the island is found on this property, together with a large number of old-growth yellow birch. The old-growth yellow birch isn't just found on that property. In fact, you see that species across this island. The stands here are believed to be the oldest in Nova Scotia, with some trees over 150 years old. Residents here have even given a few of them names like the two-bum tree and the haunted tree. And when storms hit this island, you can find the remains along the shoreline, as well as, of course, in the forest. And it's in the forest that I am now. I have made my way to that part of McNutt's Island as I continue my journey towards the old fortifications and the Cape Roseway Lighthouse. That's after the break. I'm on McNutt's Island, just offshore mainland Nova Scotia, not all that far from Shelburne. I have made it into the forested section of the island. I'm on my way to the Cape Roseway Lighthouse and some old fortifications. Now, as I have made this journey, you may have noticed there are some old street signs and, well, other odds and ends as I make my way. I will tell you, there is no country food and crafts on this island. These signs come courtesy of a Mr. Minks, who was a one-time resident of this island. Mr. Minks, whose first name I'm really not sure of, was clearly someone with a sense of humor, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say he enjoyed little pranks as well. Buried in the forest here is Mr. Minks Auto Repair, which has the slogan, "If we can't fix it, nobody can." It's a car graveyard. I did promise a few vehicles on the island, didn't I? There is, in this graveyard, quite a collection of vehicles. I'm sure each one must have its own story. I've seen some abandoned cars in the forest along my journey here, but I wonder how many of these were brought over simply for the purpose of putting a smile on the face of Mr. Minks every time someone asked about the vehicles. This strikes me as a little bit like his street signs. The island is dotted with signs of all types, from government signs to store signs and whimsical signs. The collection did not always end up here in the entirely legal way. So I suppose if the town of Shelburne is looking for some of their signs, they might find them in good, if not unusual, use over here. Now, in addition to the signs, there is also a telephone booth. Yes, an original MT&T telephone booth. But unlike the original MT&T, which Maritimers are familiar with as Maritime Tell and Tell, this one is apparently provided for your enjoyment by Minks Tell and Tell. You know, sometimes it feels like you can never find a phone when you need one, but when you don't need one and you're in the middle of the woods, well, there's one here thanks to Mink Telephone and Telegraph. Hello? At various times during its history, Shelburne Harbour was viewed as militarily important. During World War II, the harbour was considered the alternate port for convoys coming to and from North America in the event Halifax Harbour was attacked and naval operations couldn't continue there. In 1939, Fort McNutt was rapidly constructed. The 104th Coast Artillery Battery was a company of gunners stationed here, mostly from New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, operating two 10-inch M1888 naval guns brought from Fort Worden in Washington State. They were joined by RCAF signalers and an infantry unit from Quebec. I'm surrounded by forest, so much so that I can't see the ocean here. However, I can hear it. And during wartime, these trees wouldn't have been here, so there would have been a clear line of sight to the water past the lighthouse. This was one of two guns that protected Shelburne Harbour. And this site, when it was clear, was full of buildings for all of the servicemen who would have been here during World War II. It's hard to imagine looking around now what it must have been like during wartime. This was not a great place to be stationed during the war. The buildings had been constructed quickly and were of poor quality. Winters would have been cold, and while U-boats certainly operated off the coast, Shelburne was never called upon to act in place of Halifax, so there was little action. As the war drew to a close, the fort was rapidly abandoned. More often than not, the soldiers stationed here spent their time listening to the fog alarm sound from the light station, looking out across the ocean past Cape Roseway Lighthouse in search of an enemy. Cape Roseway Lighthouse. It was 1787. In Halifax, at the General Assembly of Nova Scotia, a man by the name of Mr. Wilkins requested that a navigational light be constructed to aid in safety for ships entering Shelburne Harbour. £500 was awarded. McNutt's Island, sitting dead center at the mouth of Shelburne Harbour, was the obvious choice where this light would be constructed. A 23.5-meter tall lighthouse was constructed on the rocks of McNutt's Island. It would be only the second lighthouse built by the province of Nova Scotia. Sambro Island is the only older one, built in 1760. The French had a lighthouse at Louisbourg in 1734, but of course it wasn't built by the province of Nova Scotia, and it was destroyed by the British in the siege of 1758. Being a lighthouse keeper here in the early days was not an easy task. Despite being so close to the shore, those rocks made it nearly impossible to land a boat on this end of the island. And so whenever supplies were needed from the mainland, they actually had to backpack their way all the way to the other end, to a spot very close to that wharf that I showed you before the break. There was no road then. The housing was also very poor, and the first lightkeeper, Alexander Cocken, lived here with his family of at least 5 children. He petitioned the government for funds to build a road, which were provided, but he was turned down for funds to improve the lightkeeper's house. In 1833, a report on the state of living quarters said they consisted of a jumble of sheds never intended for living in. The keeper's wife at the time told those writing the report that the home was so drafty it was impossible to keep a fire going. Finally, a new home was approved. The original wooden lighthouse on this site was unique. It had not one, but 2 lights, the one at the top that you would expect, but it also had one at the base that illuminated the rocky shore. Now, the lighthouse keeper was paid so poorly that he supplemented his income by teaching school on the island. There was half a dozen kids or so would come over here and spend the school year learning. On this rocky shore, you can still sometimes find their names scrawled on the rocks. The lower light was discontinued in 1919, and by that time, a steam-based fog alarm system had been installed, as well as a new lantern system which had been placed atop the tower. It said that new light could be seen for 18 miles on a clear night. The original lighthouse was struck by lightning in 1959 and replaced by this concrete one. Now, this lighthouse was automated in 1986 as part of a wider program of automating lighthouses. In 1989, the foghorn and the radio beacon were discontinued. The roadway that was built by the Coast Guard to service this lighthouse, well, that was no longer maintained. Servicing of this lighthouse started to be done by helicopter. But the light atop still sends out its warning signals to mariners along these shores. After the break, I'm going to be headed to Port Clyde, which is not all that far from here, to visit one of the province's treasured wetlands. Once part of the Halifax and Southwest Railway, the Port Clyde Trail is now part of the Shelburne County Rail Trail. And this is a really important spot. Not only does it cross lands scorched during the 2023 Barrington Lake wildfire, it also crosses an important conservation area. The Port Clyde Trail is where I'm on my walkabout today. I'm starting my hike near the community of Port Clyde, which is named for being at the mouth of the Clyde River. The land itself is part of the original Barrington Township grant. In 1767, Elkanah Smith and his son Joseph settled here. They ultimately sold their land in the year 1800 to the Lyles and Greenwoods, who were farmers and shipbuilders. The road where I met this trail to start my hike is called Lyles Road, after those Lyles. The Lyles had been in the area since 1783. Gavin Lyle had been a British soldier who fought in the Revolutionary War. When the war ended in 1783, Lyle was granted land along the Clyde River. The Lyle family name would die out 2 generations later in this community, as Lyle's only son, also named Gavin, had only daughters. The properties, however, remained in the hands of direct descendants until 1946. The original Lyle house is now a heritage home in Port Clyde. The community itself, well, it's never been that large. In 1956, it topped out at 121 people. It's hard to know the exact population more recently because census data now combines a number of area communities. If you know anything about how commercial growers grow wild blueberries, one of the things they do is they burn the fields over now and again, and that causes the blueberries to grow in abundance in the next season. And that is what's happened here naturally because of the wildfire. All the way along the trail are enormous quantities of blueberries, and they're just turning blue now, but that's because of the wildfire. Obviously the blueberries are here all the time, but not usually in this kind of abundance. The forest fire that burned through these woods was the largest in the province's history at 235 square kilometers. It's just amazing to be in the middle of it now. Port Clyde was an important community during the age of sail. They launched a number of vessels there. In April 1877, the fishing schooner Codseeker was launched. And it was built by Thomas Coffin and Company. Now, Thomas Coffin was known for these absolutely stunning and beautiful boats, but the Codseeker was lost off Cape Sable only a month or so after she was launched. Mr. Coffin, well, he was not only a shipbuilder, but he was also a justice of the peace, and he was a member of the legislature from 1851 until he was defeated in 1878. Coffin's foray into shipbuilding was directly connected to his acquisition of timberlands and sawmills further up the Clyde River. From 1854 until the late 1870s, they produced barks, schooners, and brigantines. Designed for fishing work in the dangerous winds and seas off Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, the Codseeker was caught in a rapidly increasing wind and ultimately rolled over. 3 crew made it to shore in a dory. Initially, townsfolk in Barrington thought the remaining crew had all drowned, but rescue ships were sent out where they found crew clinging to the ship, waiting for rescue. 2 crew members even survived 3 days trapped in the hull. Of 13 aboard, 4 of the crew died. 1 was washed out to sea while waiting for rescue, and 3 bodies were found in the hull once it was towed back to port. Ultimately, the ship was repaired and returned to service. I'm in an area known as Swains Bog. Sometimes it's called Swains Road Bog because just back there where I passed is a forestry road called Swains Road. But nonetheless, this is an important area. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's just a bog. But this was named a treasured wetland in 2018. And the entire bog covers 760 hectares in this area. Treasured Wetlands are a project of Ducks Unlimited Canada and the province of Nova Scotia. All of these wetlands are located near the ocean. This one is only a few kilometers from the sea. Coastal wetlands such as this are impacted by the ocean winds and tides. Unlike inland bogs, the water and nutrient levels fluctuate throughout the day with the tidal cycles. Coastal bogs play other roles too. They buffer atmospheric carbon, are important places for migrating birds, and they buffer the shoreline from storm surges and sea level rise. These types of bogs have become endangered ecosystems. Since the 1700s, Nova Scotia has lost 60% of its salt marshes. Now, some of that was early on due to the Acadians building dikes along the ocean and actually reclaiming that land from the sea and from the salt marshes. But more recently, a lot of that loss has come from development and infilling. The Ducks Unlimited program calls places like this treasured wetlands, but they have an official legal designation under the Nova Scotia Wetland Conservation Policy, a wetland of special significance. There are all kinds of legal definitions in Nova Scotia about what a wetland is, but essentially, one is an area of land which has a water table, either periodically or permanently, which is near the surface, and so is saturated. If you've ever walked along or in a bog, you know exactly what this definition means. There's a lot of history, both natural history and human history, wrapped up in the communities that these trails go through. There's a lot of hard work over the years by these communities as well. A lot of interesting stories. Brian Mulrooney once said that this country is made up of small towns and big dreams. And that is certainly true in every one of the communities that I've visited. And those dreams come from the past, and they're also about the future. A future that now involves building and maintaining these trails. It's something I hope you take the time to think about on your next walkabout.
Sunshine.